You've mentioned that Lebanon is a burden. Let's go down that road. What does that mean?
Lebanon, sorry?
You said Lebanon is a burden, and
Yeah,
what
yeah,
does that
yes.
mean?
Lebanon is a burden because for decades, Lebanon was considered an Israeli internal affairs. It is for Israel to deal with Lebanon. It is for Israel to attack Lebanon, and the United States can only support Israel. Now, there is a problem because the Iranians put Lebanon in the first paragraph and they will not move. They can deal with other points, but they are ready to close the Strait of Hormuz and blow up the whole deal. Now they have accepted for the nuclear inspectors to come. That's another point in favor of Iran because they can kick them out anytime they are angry because the Americans are not fulfilling their obligations in the 14-point framework. So it is not something that the Iranians have lost. On the contrary, it's another step that Iran is gaining because it's another card that Iran can play apart from the Strait of Hormuz. And instead of closing the Strait of Hormuz economically, they can say to the inspector, now you leave the country. Or like when they stopped the cameras, when they've done in the last years when Iran was attacked. And I mean the UN camera inside all the nuclear facilities. So they have more cards to play with. And Lebanon is a burden because if the ceasefire is implemented in Lebanon, if the Israelis withdraw from Lebanon even 1 meter, it is the end of Benjamin Netanyahu's future, political future. War is in favor of Netanyahu. Peace is in favor of Donald Trump. And Benjamin Netanyahu cannot continue waging war left, right, and center. This is where Vance told him, America, your only remaining ally, because Israel doesn't have anymore any ally for what Israel has committed the genocide in Lebanon, in Gaza, the genocide, the war crime, the crimes against humanity in Lebanon, and convinced Donald Trump to go to war against Iran. And it was not far from being a promenade. On the contrary, that crippled the world economy. It is the fault of America, of course, but it is manipulated by the Israelis. So Benjamin Netanyahu has to go. And this is where there was a lapsus from Donald Trump. I don't know if it was a lapsus or he really meant it when he said, well, Benjamin Netanyahu, is coming to the end of his career and is not going to be part of the new election. And this is where the Likud party, of which Benjamin Netanyahu is the leader, said, no, he's going to run the election and he's going to win. So it's obvious today that Benjamin Netanyahu is an obstacle on the road for peace, but he's going to fight back. And fighting back is in Lebanon. And this is where he needs to go. This is where he's going to say, well, tomorrow, after the meeting with the Lebanese, to try and separate Lebanon from Iran, is going to say, because I am talking to the Lebanese government that promised to disarm Hezbollah, I can withdraw to the pre position before he started the war, but the last war, but not the previous one, because in November 2024, when the war stopped, there was a ceasefire and an agreement to implement the 1701 United Nations Security Council resolution that was established after the 2006 war. He moved in and occupied 5 hills. And now what he's going to do, he can gradually withdraw from many parts of Lebanon and then go to the hill that he occupied in 2006 and say, well, now this is necessary for the security of Israel. Iran is not going to accept because in paragraph 1 it says the respect of the sovereignty of Lebanon. But that is, again, another tricky point because the sovereignty in Lebanon means non-violation of the Lebanese sovereignty. And non-violation of the Lebanese sovereignty, it means all the Israeli drones and jets should refrain from flying over the Lebanese airspace. And this is not something that Israel can do. So these 14 points relating the point one related to Lebanon will never be fully implemented, and Iran can always go back and tell the Americans, you have not abided by the agreement fully, and you're still lacking point that Israel is violating, and this is why Lebanon is a burden.
It seems that they have defined a some sort of hotline of communication between the two sides, considering the management of the Strait of Hormuz. We know basically the problem since since the signing of the MOU. The problem was the case of Lebanon. So they're gonna be 24/7 in contact to each other when something happens in Lebanon between Iran and Israel. This is something new as well. I think that's a
No, no, because they had one, it's called the mechanism, and France was in it. So they kicked France out now. There were the
no,
French, the Americans, the Israelis, the Lebanese, and now they establish a new hotline for different files. So they said this is what the Qatari proposed, and everybody accepted. So they did one for the Strait of Hormuz because they need to manage the demining first for the first 30 days, and then after that for 60 days, another 30. It's a free navigation, free and safe navigation for everybody. After the talk between Iran and Oman, because they are the two countries in control of the Strait of Hormuz, in uh, coordination with the other Arab states. Of course, the Arab states will not accept for Iran to impose fees, and Iran will never impose fees on a passage. However, they can impose fees on services, security, environment issues. That's another thing. So for now, we have 30 days demining and another 60 days of free navigation, which means this is for the Strait of Hormuz has been established. For the nuclear program, also they have established, and the Americans are very happy to see Iran accepting the return of the UN IAEA, the organization, the nuclear atomic organization, back to Iran to control the nuclear sites that have been bombed and not bombed, because the Bushehr civilian nuclear site has not been bombed, but has been bombed in the vicinity. This is why the 410 Russians have evacuated the place. But there are also the reactors in Tehran was not bombed, but the Fordo, the Natanz, all these, they have been bombed, and then they need to go inspected. And Iran is happy to do that gradually. And after that, they need to discuss what's going to happen with the percentage, the quantity of the 20%, because in the JCPOA 2015, quantity was also on the table, and then they have to deal with the 60%. That's for the nuclear. And then they have to another mechanism for Lebanon, because that is the biggest challenge. And the Qatari are very skeptical about it. And the Qatari prime minister already said, we established this new mechanism among us for Lebanon, because the one in Lebanon did not work. And why it did not work? Because the Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun, came during the war, and he said, I asked the mechanism to allow the Lebanese army and Lebanese workers to connect two villages with a water conduct, and I've been trying for the last 3 days without any success. So the Lebanese president was not capable of uh, giving back the water to two villages. This is where Israel was disregarding completely the mechanism and also the Lebanese president. And now they want to use the Lebanese president as a tool to try and bypass Iran and saying, well, we are talking to the Lebanese. But Iran is very happy to see that. Iran's main concern is the end of the war and this respect of the Lebanese sovereignty. Whoever achieves that, Iran is happy with that.
yeah. In the third point, we had the story on the part of Iranians. The spokesperson of the Iranian foreign ministry, he said that considering the nuclear program, a working group on nuclear file has been formed, which will begin its work as soon as the United States has fully implemented Clause 13 of the MOU. Clause 13 basically is talking about is putting the clause 1, 4, 5, and 11 together. Number 1 is Lebanon. Number 4 and 5 and 11 basically talking about the Iranian frozen assets and the sanction on Iranian oil sector or energy sector, and the sanctions on Iranian economy, the sanction of IAEA, UN Security Council, and primary and secondary sanctions. So before achieving that, it's fully implemented the clause number 13. This is, it seems that as time goes by, the two sides, the technical teams, are trying to facilitate that process.
So, in the paragraph 13, as you said, after the signing of the MOU, and they begin to implement the paragraph 1, 4, 5, 10, and 11, and the continuing implementation of these measures. So there is a continuing implementation. So no violation is accepted. America and Iran will start negotiating regarding the final deal. So they talk about all the other paragraph and start negotiating about it only when all the paragraph 1, 4, 5, 10, and 11 are fulfilled and implemented. This is the burden on the US. Now, they've started with they lift the sanctions on Iran in relation to the oil. They lift the blockades on the Strait of Hormuz. They are now discussing what to give to Iran for the compensation and for the $300 billion that the Gulf country decided to pay, and under form of what needs Iran has to recover this amount of money. And then they will start giving back some of the Iranian frozen asset. So all that will be completed, and Iran will receive all of its asset and all of the $300 billion dollars worth of goods, because there is no cash that they will receive, but their money, they can receive it in a form that they will discuss. But again, is number one is in the way, and number one is clearly stating that the United States and Iran and their allies in the current war, they have to permanently terminate all military operation. And to terminate all the military operation, it means Israel needs to stop violating the Lebanese sovereignty and bombing specifically villages, because Israel now is bombing in the villages and destroying homes in Marun and Ras, for example, on the borders. And then they have to ensure the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon. How are they going to do that? So before they implement that, they can start finalizing the deal. So they have to see the Israeli out of Lebanon before.
Yeah. You would be surprised what we've just learned from Channel 14 of Israel. It says Channel 14 is important because it's so close to Benjamin Netanyahu. And it suggests that Iran is using electromagnetic low-frequency weapon to influence President Trump's decision. It just, it's the situation in Israel, because the latest poll in Israel shows that 92.1% of Israelis believe that they have lost the war or Iran won the war. This is something new. Before that, we haven't seen these sort of polls coming out of Israel. I don't remember. Maybe you know better than this, but better than me, because I have never seen Israelis coming out and declaring that they have been defeated. Never in Syria, in Lebanon, in Gaza. They were always dominating. They're saying we are winning, we are killing, we are destroying everything. Nobody can fight us. And right now, when you see that coming from the Israeli society, and that means something. Even the percentage within the Likud party and those far right people is more than 92%, in 93.4%, which is worse for Benjamin Netanyahu.
There are elements for that. First of all, in 2006, when the Israelis went to war against Lebanon, they established the Vinograd Commission to examine why the Israeli army failed to achieve its objectives and where were the mistakes that they have committed and how they rushed to war. And George W. Bush really pushed them, go for it and continue, don't stop, and was encouraging them. And they had no plan to invade Lebanon. And they fell into that trap unprepared. So for that, they established a commission because, militarily speaking, you win when your adversary is defeated, has raised the white flag, and has been disarmed or doesn't exist anymore, and you have achieved all your desired objectives. So if you have your objective from the very beginning clearly stated and you achieve them, you won the battle. But if you have failed to achieve all the objectives, and above all, you have the United States against you today, and considering that your prime minister has become a liability, then the Israelis are really in a deep trouble. But if you add again a third point, which is more serious, that Iran is actually dictating its terms. So let's see. They went to Pakistan to negotiate what? To open a Strait of Hormuz that was open before the war. They negotiating what again? To not produce a nuclear bomb that they never produced, and the United Nations IAEA inspectors were there in Iran inspecting everything. To not enrich beyond the 3.67. Oh no, first they wanted zero enrichment. And now the Americans acknowledge that Iran can have an enrichment program. Donald Trump said they can have ballistic missiles. He said, well, other countries have ballistic missiles. Why not Iran? And Iran can make nuclear bomb and can make nuclear reactors, and they can produce electricity, because I told them you have so much gas and oil. Why do you need the nuclear? But it's okay if they need it. So he was justifying what he said he destroyed in June 2025 to return to it in February 2026 and said, that is my target that I have destroyed in June 2025, and I'm going to destroy it again. And Iran is not allowed to have a nuclear facility and zero nuclear enrichment. And then he said that he killed all the leaders, and suddenly the leader is intelligent and he is the decision maker, and he is the one who's negotiating with the United States. So when Donald Trump swallowed and ate all his words that he stated at the first beginning of the war, you don't need really to analyze who won the war. What has been achieved by the Americans and the Israelis? Of course, the Americans are angry because the Israelis promised them Iran in 3 days. So who do they blame? The Mossad chief that he failed in his assessment, but the prime minister approved. It's exactly like the 7th of October that is going back as a boomerang effect to hit Benjamin Netanyahu on the head, because he accepted the resignation of all the security leaders that were around during the 7th of October, but he never acknowledged his own responsibility. Now this is going to come out in Israel, and they're going to push him toward the commission. Not he is going to appoint, but an independent commission that is going to put the blame on him. So all that is going to blow in the face of Benjamin Netanyahu, who is today scolded by Vice President Vance and saying that you have no longer friends, don't try to challenge us. But the most serious thing Vance said to the Israelis, He said, all your defense system, the interception defense system that you have defended yourself with against Iran and Hezbollah, I didn't mention them. He said they are made by Americans and they were shipped by America and paid by Americans. So he's saying, if you want to play with us and you're not going to listen, we're going to pull out, and then you continue your war with Iran and Hezbollah, and we are out of the equation. Well, this is where the Israelis are hearing for the first time a language completely different when Benjamin Netanyahu told them repeatedly in the last 16 years of his ruling, don't worry about the Americans, I deal with them. And the Israelis are blaming his arrogance to where Israel is today.